Mark Rogers, TV Talking Ohio State football. We bring in Claire Crawford. She is on the ozone.net, and we spoke with Claire last week, had a great conversation. So you're always welcome, Claire. Thanks for joining us.
I love being here. I had a ton of fun. Thank you so much for having me.
No question. So Mike Weber had an outstanding freshman season for Ohio State. Impossible for him to replace Zeke Elliott, but he had almost 1,000 yards rushing and was a prime part of that Ohio State offense. Kind of disappeared late in the season, not due to his fault, but taken out of the game plan to a certain extent. And if you look at any top 5 list of running backs in the Big Ten, Mike Weber placed prominently on all sorts of these preseason lists, but there could be some factors that take him again out of the game plan and maybe spotlight another Ohio State running back with the season opener against Indiana coming up.
I agree. So there are a few things that could be leading into that. So I think the biggest and foremost reason that Mike Weber could be sharing some playing time, especially in the opener against Indiana, is that he has still not been full speed at practice yet. And the coaches have mentioned during the press conference, you can see it during practices, he's still not going 100%. And apparently, according to reports, it's just kind of precautionary. He does have a tight hamstring, according to the reports. So what we're seeing is him just taking it easy. He's still out there practicing, but he's still not going full speed and 100% yet. Again, they've said it's precautionary, and they have said that he is going to be ready for week 1. It does lead me to believe that we will see as fans a few other players that really need some miles and some playing time step up in this opener if Mike is indeed still a little ouchy.
Yeah, there are a few candidates, but there's one who has definitely stood out at camp. Jerome Baker in particular said, wow, I'm really impressed with
J.K. Dobbins. I think all of us are super excited about J.K. Dobbins and what he brings to the table. I think another reason that we might see a little more of J.K. Dobbins is that Demario McCall has been taking reps at H-back with Paris Campbell. So as tight as we know is that depth chart is at running back, they haven't announced who's going to be behind Mike Weber yet. And with Demario now taking reps at H-back with Paris, not sure if that's to build a little depth there at H-back or whether we know that Demario should have some playing time and also should JK. That's another reason that leads me to believe that we're going to see a little bit more out of J.K. Dobbins, possibly in the beginning of the season here. But you hear all kinds of praise coming out of camp from anyone, from players and coaches and the media, saying words like explosive, and he's making one of the best defenses in the country, if not the best defense in the country, look silly at times. And these are not just the second team. This is starters that he's making look silly at points. So it's very encouraging from a fan standpoint, and it's exciting to think that, I'll go out on a limb and say that it's possible that J.K. Dobbins has more yardage, more playing time, and that opener against Indiana than Mike Weber does.
Yeah, and again, getting back to the comments of Jerome Baker in particular, he says, the kid shows up and he's instantly feeling comfortable in the locker room. He's good, nice to be around. He assimilated himself into the team, so he took care of business off the field in regards to being a teammate instantly. And on the field, yeah, he's just a blur. You think you got him, you miss him, he's gone. He's ready to take on big-time defenders physically straight ahead, but he can also make a miss. He's just kind of the complete back who's shown it at practice to this point. Of course, the game situation much different, but when you're playing an Ohio State defense every day in practice, it pretty much prepares you for the season. What I find interesting is that Urban Meyer at Ohio State in particular has relied on one guy. It was Carlos Hyde. It was Zeke Elliott. Mike Weber to a certain extent last year, although that was much to place on a freshman. But if J.K. Dobbins emerges like he does and Mike Weber gets healthy, Demario McCall Yeah, they may have the luxury of continuing to work him at H-back because they've got two guys that they can rely on at the primary running back position, and it may be a different type feel for the Ohio State running back rather than having that one stud who just is the workhorse back there, having two guys that can stay fresh and be different types of backs to give the defense a different look.
I agree. And body type wise, Mike Weber and J.K. Dobbins are similarly suited. So they would have a similar skill set, but I really think it's going to be important. I mentioned last time I was on your show with the addition of more tempo in this offense. It's going to be even more important to have fresh legs, to be able to really, and again, with there being so much depth there, they're really going to need to work these guys in early and often. JK not only has been impressive at fall camp, he had an amazing spring. He was I believe he was the first, I'm not sure if he was the first, to get his black stripe off and be an official member of that Ohio State offense. He had a stupid, crazy high school career that I think everybody was excited about. I want to say, what was it? It's like over 5,000 yards in his high school career. So it's and also broke his leg his senior season. So for him to have made that big of a comeback and to really show everyone how just explosive is the word I'm hearing the most, he is really, really impressive. This is nothing to take away from Mike Weber. We are really not saying that Mike Weber is, obviously he was named the starter. We're not saying that Mike Weber is less than J.K. Dobbins. We're not saying that Mike Weber hasn't grown as a player. We're not saying that Mike Weber hasn't matured a little bit, which is one of the things I was really wanting to see more of out of Mike Weber. And we hear that word maturity a lot, especially coaches. They bring it up a lot. And it's not just about, it's not like the Cheez-It commercials, where they're immature. Maturity includes vision and really expanding your position to be a great pass catcher, to work on vision. And it really is going to be interesting to see how mature JK has been already with locker room stuff and Cheez-It commercial stuff, how well that translates onto the field. And at times, again, we're not pitting these players against each other, but at times we've seen Mike Weber get away with a few personal fouls. I'm sure Michigan and Michigan State fans can remember a few very specific personal fouls that didn't get called on Mike Weber. And that level of maturity needs to also translate onto the field. It could have been a very costly penalty in both situations for Mike Weber and for the Ohio State Buckeyes. So those two things, again, seeing JK play in front of the kind of crowd that now he's going to be in front of 100,000 people, 100,000, 107,000 to be exact. And it's a much different situation than what he's come from before. But on all accounts, it sounds like we should be optimistic.
It's good to know that Urban Meyer is not in the locker room on a regular basis with the white lab coat as in the Cheez-It commercials, testing each player's Cheez-It maturity. I can't really picture that.
Right, telling dad jokes. I can't see that.
Yeah, to your point about J.K. Dobbins, this was the second rated all-purpose back coming out of high school in 2017, sixth rated player out of Texas. Overall, maybe the richest recruiting state in high school football just in this 2017 class. And it's interesting with JK wearing number 2 that a player on the defensive side, number 2 defensive end Chase Young, is drawing rave reviews for his early work as a freshman. Tyquan Lewis in particular calling him a specimen. So good things out of another great recruiting class from Ohio State. Claire Crawford joining us from the ozone.net talking Ohio State football. You can join me at Mark Rogers TV, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and the full conversations with folks like Claire at places like Stitcher, Podbean, and iTunes. Just search Mark Rogers TV. All right, Claire, Dabo Swinney couldn't just let the 31-0 rest. He had to make some comments this week, which I'm not going to steal from you. I want you to set this up because you alerted me to the comments that Dabo made this week, looking back at the playoff game last year and the preparation in regards to his thought process about Big Ten football.
So in short, Dabo Swinney was asked to be, he was being interviewed for a radio show. And both you and I know there are ways to get what we want out of people when we're asking them questions. And whether he was set up to ask these questions or not, Dabo Swinney mentioned that he had prepared for Ohio State in a way where he didn't watch a ton of Big Ten play. He didn't really until it was time for bowl prep. When bowl prep
Hey, Claire, I'm
sorry.
I'm sorry to cut you off.
That's okay. I had a feeling you did. Let's see if I can reconnect that.
Yeah, your audio is fine. It just I lost your picture, and I was just waiting for it to come back, and it never did.
I had lost you.
Oh, really?
I had lost you during that whole setup of that segment. So hopefully.
Oh, really? Then I don't know who it is. Now I can see you. Fine.
Perfect.
Yeah. So that could have been me, maybe. I don't know. Because I couldn't see you either. So,
we're good.
All right.
Now.
I can start that whole thing over. Here we go. Mark Rogers, TV talking Ohio State football with Claire Crawford. You can join her on the ozone.net. And, of course, join me here on YouTube. Subscribe to my YouTube channel and get all the audio versions, the full conversations with folks like Claire at Podbean, iTunes, and Stitcher. Just search Mark Rogers TV. 31-0 is burned into the minds and hearts of Ohio State fans from last year's playoff embarrassment against Clemson, and it was brought up again this week, and Dabo Swinney had some comments to make about his preparation for the college football playoff game against Ohio State. And Claire, since you basically tuned me into this deal, I'll let you set it up.
Sure. So before I mention what Dabo's comments were, for some reason it just reminded me of a story of Woody Hayes, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with this, but that score being burned into your memory. Woody Hayes once made a rug of a score of a really difficult Michigan loss, particularly difficult Michigan loss, and he made the players walk over it to remind themselves every single day. And the coaches have been asked whether this Clemson loss has been something positive or if it's something that they need to overcome. And it sounds like it's being positive motivation. So I'll preface all of that with that little story. But Dabo Swinney was being interviewed on a radio station, and he was asked about preparation for the bowl game. And he mentioned that during this preparation, he hadn't really watched a ton of Big Ten football, which reminds me that the coaches poll is ridiculous again. But I'm also Dabo mentioned that he hadn't watched a ton of Big Ten until it was time to prepare for the playoff game, and that once he did start to prepare, he realized that they had everything in hand at Clemson, and he went back to his players, and his comment was that these boys are in trouble. And Ohio State fans have been up in arms about the comment of Dabo Swinney saying that the Big Ten is overrated and that he saw something that no one else had seen yet and exposed Ohio State. In reality, in my opinion, it's difficult. It's a bitter pill to swallow as a fan. You know, we have to suffer the loss, and then we have to suffer hearing about the loss. But Dabo Swinney's not wrong.
So
Dabo Swinney didn't say anything wrong.
Definitely. So Claire, I often have this conversation and debate with a number of people, both like yourself or the viewers that comment who love to compare conferences, and I do as well. So we can look at bowl play and postseason play. We can look at the big matchups like Ohio State, Oklahoma, and frame some sort of evaluation on how good these conferences are. The one thing that I would say about the playoff game, it was 31-0. And despite the 31 points against the Ohio State defense, I would think most people that know football and watch it and understand it would know that the Buckeyes defense acquitted itself rather well. Just when you're on the field constantly after the offense goes 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out, you're going to you're going to cave in at some point. But it was a 17-0 game with 8 or 10 minutes left. The Ohio State offense was dismal, atrocious in that game. The other thing I'll say about that, so the point I'm making there is if the win and the loss is all that matters for the competition on the field and winning championships and winning in the standings. So whether it was 31-0 or 31-30, that doesn't matter in terms of a result, but in terms of evaluation of the teams and the conferences, I think it's a huge difference. So if Ohio State loses that game 31-30, then and Dabo makes comments about the Big Ten and Ohio State, then I'm like, okay, well, you were very fortunate to get out of that game with a win, calm down. But it was 31-0. His team was clearly the better team. I would argue, based on the two teams' track records during the regular season, that game was a bit of an aberration. I believe Clemson to be the better team, but 31-0, I don't think that would be typically the score if they played 10 times. I think as well, Claire, that Ohio State fans should be reminded, if they don't already know, that when their head coach Urban Meyer coached another school in Gainesville, Florida, that they played Ohio State in the 2006 January 2007 national championship game, and were a far better football team when Ohio State was considered consensus #1 best team in the country, and Florida mauled the Buckeyes. And it was later discovered through interviews that Urban Meyer said similar things. Once I looked at the tapes, our coaches looked at the tape, looked at Ohio State, looked at some advantages we had in terms of speed and space. Their offensive line maybe not great in pass protection, and we have a great defensive line. I felt very comfortable about that game. I felt good. I told my players, we're better than them. Don't believe all this #1 consensus nonsense. We're better. So Urban Meyer has been on the other side of that and made similar comments.
And it's very funny, and again, I'm not saying I'm not proud to be a Buckeye fan, but there's always a contingency that gets defensive anytime they hear something like that, and they need to remember that it's not personal, and it wasn't anything derogatory. It wasn't Dabo whining about anything. It was Dabo Swinney being professional and making a very accurate observation. So no, I don't think that Dabo Swinney was wrong. No, it's not easy to hear as a fan. It's not fun to be reminded of that, nor is it fun to be reminded of the 2006 loss either. Thank you, Mark.
Sorry.
Okay. That was the fun year that the basketball team lost to the same team as well. So we all love to be reminded of that year. But yes, I don't think that Dabo was wrong in his observation, and clearly he did see something. What we're all kind of curious about is what he did see and whether Ohio State has made improvements on that going forward.
That's the important point right there. The rest of it's just debate and fun talk and conference pride, and the 06 championship game, which I will again bring up. Sorry, Claire. It also propelled this narrative that lasted for like 7 or 8 years that the Big Ten is garbage because Ohio State made 2 championship games and got manhandled to a lesser extent against LSU, but that kind of cascaded down the rest of the conference. And even though the Big Ten had successful bowl seasons, because of what Ohio State did on the big stage, that kind of reflected on the rest of the conference, and that's just being changed here for the Big Ten in the last few years. The other thing I'll note is I talked to a lot of ACC people. I covered ACC Media Days, and that just seemed to be a theme across the ACC that we're going to take this 10-3 finish in postseason play, and we won the national championship. And, of course, Florida State did beat Michigan, different circumstance, last second, 33-32 in the Orange Bowl. But we're going to take this and we're going to pump our chests out because we're sick of hearing about the SEC. And to a lesser extent, the Big Ten last year was getting the pub as the best conference during the regular season. And those coaches just, to a man, just talked constantly about how great the ACC is and we're the best conference. So that was just kind of a narrative that they, I guess, individually decided, or maybe as a group, that for whatever reason, we really need to play upon what happened last year and talk up the ACC as the best.
Well, I think part of the reason that the coaches still talk about conference play and how strong conference play is, no matter who they're facing, you're not going to hear a coach say, oh yeah, this team that we're about to face in our conference is a cupcake. That's never going to happen. But I think part of it is that with, strength of schedule really being out of that conversation leading into what goes into a playoff spot, what qualifies you to be in there. A championship game clearly is a conference championship game is not included in part of that. So they have to make it seem like their strength of schedule somehow qualifies them if they don't make it to the championship game, which Ohio State didn't through that loss to Penn State. So I think that's part of the reason why these coaches still chuff up what is the conference play, is because they try to make it seem like strength of schedule is still a bigger deal. Obviously, it comes out in the wash, and it doesn't really matter what the coaches say in the end about their own team. And they always end up fessing up after the fact, what exactly happened. We've seen Urban fall on the sword a couple times for some of his coordinators and some of the stuff that they've said. But I think that that's the main reason why we still hear a lot of conference play talk from the coaches.
I think the posturing also has a purpose. I don't know how effective it is, but the College Football Playoff Committee, of course, has all the control of who makes the field. But there are, again, the math doesn't work. 5 conferences, 4 spots. So somebody gets left out, and you don't want to be the conference that gets left out because you're considered a weak conference, i.e. the Big 12. All right. So that brings us to, Claire, the ESPN Power Index, which I don't put a whole lot of stock in, but still it's a fun conversation when we project what teams could do and who could make the playoffs. And right now, it's not a close projection in matching talent versus schedule, according to the Power Index, that Ohio State far and away has the best chance of going undefeated this year at 35%, with Alabama at 10%, Oklahoma and Washington at 5%. Didn't know if you had some thoughts on that.
Well, again, it's all conjecture until they hit the field. We'll find out very quickly how good Ohio State's chances. And this is the other difficult part, is that we've seen Ohio State teams that had no business going undefeated. 2012 is the perfect example, that overachieved. And then we've seen a 2015 team that projected to be, there was nobody that was going to beat that team, and they fell short. So I think it's fun to talk about, like you mentioned, but what's on paper, there's way more than goes beyond what we see on paper. As much as I would love to wax poetic about how the Buckeyes are going to go undefeated, and it's going to sound like hyperbole coming from me as a fan, I think really it's difficult to say whether what comes out on paper is actually going to happen. I would love it.
So the obvious pitfalls would be the home game against Penn State in late October and the trip to Ann Arbor the last day of the season at Michigan. Those would be the obvious ones, but I'm going to throw out 2 wild cards because we did see an undefeated Michigan team go to Iowa City and lose to the Hawkeyes on the road. And so Iowa can be very dangerous at home. That could be a night game. So that's a road game against the Big Ten West. And a similar foe, even though Buckeye fans might laugh because it was 62-3 in Columbus, they do have a trip to Nebraska. And the last time they went there, they blew a big lead when Braxton Miller got hurt in 2011. And so a couple trips to the Big Ten West could be difficult, and we saw that play out last year when the Buckeyes went to Wisconsin and had to go to overtime to beat the Badgers.
I completely agree with that. And Big Ten fans like to even divide themselves further and say that the East is stronger than the West, which the last few years it has been. However, like you mentioned, with that close one with Wisconsin, everyone forgets how consistent Iowa has been. Iowa's also had a very easy road to their success as of late, but Kirk Ferentz has paid a lot of money as a college football coach, one of the highest paid guys out there for what he's been able to accomplish. I agree that Iowa City could potentially be dangerous. It's a very exciting place to play. But as the younger parts of the team, we're going to need to see who is really mature enough to handle that type of atmosphere. And then from that point on, their game plan. Iowa's been a very steady, consistent force. We'll see what Ohio State has as far as firepower to overcome that. I think the Ohio State defense is really going to be what overcomes.
And you make a good point about the hostility of the crowd, because for the young players, because up until that point, the only road tests are going to be Indiana and Rutgers. So the atmosphere at Nebraska first and then Iowa is going to be unseen by the young talent up until those games. Another interesting thing of note, Claire, is you mentioned the 2012 team that won undefeated. It was a very exciting rebound from all the controversy and the 7 losses the year before, that Urban Meyer shows up, and even though there was nothing to play for tangibly, that they ran the table and went undefeated. And Urban Meyer then was able to wrap up his second undefeated season. So the interesting side note is that he's had 3 national championship teams that all lost 1 game, and he's had 2 undefeated teams that didn't win the national championship. One because it was Utah and they weren't given that opportunity. They did win the Fiesta Bowl over Pitt, and then the 2012 team that was on probation.
And exactly right. I think that it's difficult to say, again, like, you can have this unbelievable talent and everybody coming back, and just there's no real way to predict what is going. That's what we love about college football, is the parity and the week to week what's going to happen. By the way, you mentioned Indiana being a road environment. I don't know if you've ever been to Bloomington when Ohio State plays there, but it is most certainly an Ohio State home game. And this is not, again, hyperbole. I've been there many times, and it is really fun to go to as an Ohio State fan, because you're welcome there. It's family. Like, they will start an OHIO no matter what the score is. The Ohio State will start an OHIO. And anybody that listens to my show with Joe Dexter knows that I've got to be in Bloomington just to catch a smoked turkey leg. That's my favorite part about the games in Bloomington.
That's the best you can do at Bloomington. Is that a specialty?
Yeah, it's like a smoked turkey leg, like the kind that you see at the Renaissance festivals. You feel kind of like a Viking. You almost feel like you're watching the gladiators when you've got the smoked turkey leg.
And yeah.
Exactly right. Yes, it's
okay.
very.
I did not know that about IU football. So
there you go.
It's a fun discussion, and it's an informative discussion with Claire Crawford from the Ozone. We appreciate it, Claire. And before we let you go, you mentioned your show with Joe Dexter. So where can we find you?
You can find me on theozone.net. Joe and I have a show called Oh Hail No. We definitely have a lot of fun. Joe and I have been doing the show for a very long time, and we're brand new to the Ozone. So you'll definitely have to head over there, take a listen. You can also find me on Twitter. It's just Buckeye Claire, Claire with no E. And yeah, just take a look.
And by the way, Claire, I might be wrong, but I would bet a few bucks that I'm right in your earlier description of the Woody Hayes incident and him having the rug created that reminded the players of the previous Michigan game. So this is my educated guess in knowing Ohio State football. 1968, the Buckeyes win the national championship. They run through 69 undefeated to the Michigan game. Bo Schembechler's first year at Ann Arbor, pull off a huge upset against the Buckeyes, 24-12. I think that one hurt more than any for Woody Hayes, and I believe that was the 24-12 was the score of the 1969 game that led to the 1970 game, which I believe was the famous Woody Hayes going for 2 up 48-14 late in the game and being asked after the game, why did you go for 2? And he said, because I couldn't go for 3.
You are absolutely right on all of those things. And I'm like wiping a tear right now at those stories. Those are my favorites. I have a little bumps going on. It was such a golden era of not only college football, but between that rivalry. And again, as Ohio State fans, we look at Jim Harbaugh and some of the crazy antics, or the fact that the rivalry has been a little unbalanced. But it, in my opinion, will always be the greatest rivalry in sports. and I'm hanging on to it. I love that you knew all that. That makes me happy.
Amen to that. I agree, start to finish on greatest rivalry. And it's a great discussion, and it comes up the last week of college football every year. Ohio State, Michigan, Auburn, Alabama, Army, Navy, which I put in a different category because of obvious reasons. But Ohio State, Michigan, despite or regardless of what the records are or what the recent series has been, I think ranks as the best. All right, Claire, I appreciate it. It's always a good time.
Thank you so much again, Mark.